welcome to the Economic Development, Skills and Policy Committee. The meeting today is open to the public and will be webcast, and the recording will also be available for people to view through the Council's website at a later date. It's also possible that Sheffield Live TV will record and rebroadcast the meeting. Today we have no petitions, statements or questions from members of the public. Please can I request mobile phones and other such equipment to switch to silent mode. There's no fire test planned today. As usual, if there is an emergency evacuation, please take instruction from the Town Hall staff, and the assembly point is Tudor Square. Please note that Appendix 1 for item number 9 is not available to the public and press because it contains exempt information as described in paragraph 3, schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. If members wish to discuss the information, we will need to ask members of the public and press to leave, and we will have to temporarily halt the webcast. Item 12 in its entirety is not available to the public and press for similar reasons. Could I ask each member of the committee to introduce themselves in turn, and then officers?
Good afternoon, Councillor Ibiula, Councillor for Netherage and Sharrow, also the Deputy Chair of this committee.
Hello, Councillor Nikki Belfield, Labour Member for Firth Park Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Tony Downing, Member for Mossborough Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Julie Growcup, Member for Stocksbridge and Upper Don Ward. I'm the substitute member for Councillor Denise Fox, who has an engagement today as the Armed Forces Champion for the Council. Thank you, Chair.
Henry Nottage, Councillor for Hillsborough Ward.
Good afternoon, Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesall Ward.
Councillor Joe Watson, Councillor John Totley, sub for Sam Clement-Jones.
And before we go to officers, I think, Ibi, we have a...
Yes, Chair. Councillor Safia Said will be joining us a little bit late. She's joining us from a Deputy Lord Mayor's duty. Thank you.
If officers can introduce themselves when they come to their bit of the agenda, but we have Fiona from...
Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Fiona Martinez, I'm Principal Democratic Services Officer.
Hello, I'm Sherry Grant and I'm the Assistant Legal Director.
Okay, so without further ado, we will move on to declarations of interest. Do any members of the committee want to declare any interest relating to any items on the agenda? I'm not seeing anybody say yes, so we'll take that as a negative. As previously said, we have no public petitions, questions or statements. Thank you. Less than 5 minutes in and I've made a mistake. Fantastic. So the minutes of the previous meeting, can we take those as an accurate record, please? Thank you for the reminder. So that moves us on to the work programme. I think, Fiona, you're going to take us through that.
Good afternoon all. So this item is to update you on any changes to the work programme since our previous policy committee meeting. In Appendix 1, which is page 22 of your pack, there's an amended items and new items section of the report, and there are a number of new items, including the culture strategy adoption and social value annual report, and these are due for committee in October. And there is a REC performance update scheduled for December's policy committee meeting. A number of items have also been amended, which is listed on that page also. And I just would like to remind you that the work programme is a live document and feedback and input from members is encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. So colleagues, having been encouraged to provide feedback, does anybody have any comments or suggestions for the work programme at this stage? Councillor Masters.
Thank you. I just think it's disappointing to see that sort of work on the LGBTQ quarter has slipped yet again. So, I mean, it says the first meeting's scheduled to take place. Sorry, I'll get my mouse into order. Sort of what stage have the workshops got to? Or is that what we've got to wait until December to find out? I mean, how many meetings have taken place?
Thank you, Barbara. I have had a briefing on what officers are doing on that particular item. I know that they are working on it. I'm not aware of the full detail, so I would be reasonably confident that they'll be able to bring something to our meeting. Whether it's as you describe, I don't yet know, but I do know that officers are working on it.
No, thank you. That is the reassuring.
Thank you. There was just one item from myself. I know that the first budget of the new government in October is going to have significant implications for the whole council. So at an appropriate point in our work programme, we need that possibly in the November meeting. I'm seeing lots of heads. I guess every committee would be saying that. So that's super. Thank you. So that takes us on to item number 8, which is a report on the Sheffield Employment and Skills Strategy. And I think we have, well, do you want to introduce yourself, presenting officer?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Diana Buckley. I'm the Director of Economy, Skills and Culture. I'm going to bring some officers and partners up to co-present this item, if that's okay. So, Cassie, do you want to... So Cassie Holden is the consultant lead who's been working on the employment and skills strategy with us, and he's going to do some of the data presentation today for you, and then I'll let partners introduce themselves.
Paul Harvey, Chair of VCS Skills and Employment Group at Voluntary Action Sheffield.
Good afternoon, I'm Andrew Hartley, Deputy Chief Executive at the Sheffield College.
Thank you. And Laura Hayfield is here, who's the Head of Service, is going to be supporting this work as well. This is quite a lot of information that we've provided committee today, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at some of it. Working with the chair, we're going to separate the item into 3 parts, just so it's a bit easier for you guys to ask questions and kind of get into. So Cassie's going to do a presentation on the data set, the employment skills evidence base that was handed out with the report. We'll pause after that and take any questions from committee. We'll then move on to the strategic framework that's been the subject of round 1 consultation to get any comments on that. And then we'll have a final presentation, just going through the paper from Laura, talking about what's happening next in phase 2. And then there'll be an opportunity at the end to take any questions as well. So if we focus questions on data in the first part, the strategic framework for the second one, and then anything for the third one would be fine. Is everybody comfortable with that? Yeah, great. I'll hand over to Cassie then. Thank you.
Thanks, Di. And hopefully I can get the slides going. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there are slides behind you and in front of you if you want to have a look at the data slides that accompanied the data that was sent out.
Could I just, I know this happened last year, does any member of the committee have any visual impairment, which means they might need to sit closer to the screen? Anything? Okay, fine. Sorry about that. Last year we did have somebody that needed to do that. Thank you. Apologies.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Cassie Holden from CADA Research. We've been working with colleagues in CSAB and in the Council's Employment and Skills team to develop a new employment and skills strategy for Sheffield. As Diana said, that has been circulated in your pack, so I will not move on. Sorry.
There we go. Thank you.
Oh, yes, I'm not. The strategy, as I say, it's in your packs, but I'm just going to briefly talk you through what we've been doing and why it's really important piece of work that we've been doing. I think this strategy is a vital part of the overall jigsaw for taking forward many of the ambitions which were set out in the City Goals work. It's also a really important piece of timing. The new government has highlighted how important employment and skills are to its plans for growing the economy and creating a fairer Britain. So this timing is very opportune, and it's also really good timing locally in terms of the development of the employment and skills partnership in the city, the establishment of CSAB, who've really been driving this work and steering the development of the strategy. If you just go to the next one, thank you. There's two outputs from the piece of work which we are producing. The first one is an employment and skills strategy for post-16 skills, so it's focused on that post-16 group. That includes a clear vision which recognises the current and future challenges in this area and sets out long-term missions and priorities for the city. And then accompanying that will be a detailed 5-year roadmap, which will be much more action-focused and will provide a real plan for partners in the city to take forward actions to deliver on the strategy. So those two pieces of work are really integrated. Thank you. And in terms of approach, there's sort of 3 stages to the work, and we've done the first 2 of those now. The final part of the work is going to be about turning that strategy into an action plan, and Laura will come back to that at the end. Thank you. It's really important from our perspective and from the partners' perspective that the strategy is meaningful and owned by the Sheffield Partnership, and therefore it really must reflect the experiences of people, businesses and partners. So the first stage of the work has really been about putting in place the foundations for a successful strategy. The first one of those is an appreciation of the policy context, which is going to shape the delivery of the strategy. And there's been an awful lot of policy change recently, and that's going to continue over the next few months as the new government develops its thinking. Set out here is just a snapshot of the context which we've been considering, and the strategy recognises these wider policies and is designed to align with those so that Sheffield's activities align with national and regional partners, ensuring coherence and consistency in what can be quite a complex area. Thank you. The next really important part of the foundation is the evidence base. An appreciation of the current position in Sheffield, the strengths and weaknesses in the city, and recent performance and trends is obviously really key to pitching the strategy and the priorities right. So one of the first pieces of work that we did was undertake a detailed review, and there's an evidence-based report which was in your packs, and the alongside. Sorry.
I'm really sorry to interrupt. I'm aware we've got a couple of substitute members here today, so there's quite small print on the screen, so this is embedded in the soft copy of the agenda you've had, yes, which may be easier to read.
Yes.
Nikki?
It was circulated as part of the papers. Yeah.
Sorry. In the electronic documents that we had, there were 2 files that were sort of embedded, but I couldn't open them, and I wasn't sure if this was them. But what I would say is if you've only got the original documents, this really good, the first slide there with the dashboard, I think it's on page 37 of the actual report. But it was quite hard to sort of navigate around.
So apologies for that, colleagues. If anybody, so we did say we'll have questions at the end of each stage. If anybody's finding any of this difficult to read, given what you either have in front of you on the screen, just let me know and we'll pause to get you the information. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah. Okay, fine, thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you. So yes, there is a full detailed evidence report, and there's also an interactive data tool which can be accessed to actually get to the numbers behind the data, which partners will have access to be able to dig into the detail more than we can include in a report. And the work that we've done on that has fed directly into the strategy, and I'll highlight just some of the headline points now. I won't attempt to go through the whole thing. Just in summary, Sheffield's economy is a big economy. It's a big city economy. It's an economy of 17,000 businesses, 272,000 jobs, and 10,000 jobs added since the pandemic. The number of people qualified to level 3, so A-level sort of level and above, has been increasing, and there's a pipeline of skilled new entrants to the labour market coming through the two universities, the college apprenticeship starts. There's obviously strength in a number of key specialist sectors and a really important foundational economy which provides services and well-being and jobs to 2/3 of people working in the city. But jobs growth here has been slower than in other core cities. There are fewer people with those really high-level qualifications, and our productivity levels, our output per job, are the lowest of all the core cities. Lower productivity tends to result in lower wages, and that impacts directly on prosperity levels in the city. 12% of jobs in the city don't pay the real living wage. So the economy, although it's we've got a thriving economy, it could be much stronger, and that stronger economy would provide more opportunities for people in Sheffield to live more prosperous and healthier lives. Alongside that, there are big disparities within the city. So we know we've got around 3/4 of our working age population in work, but a much lower level of employment amongst ethnic minority populations, about 20 percentage points lower than the overall average, and also amongst people with disabilities, only around half of those people are in work, and a big geographic divide as well. So the averages sometimes mask the position at local level. And we also know that health has been becoming an important constraint on the labour market, with fewer people with health conditions able to secure and sustain employment. That's not a Sheffield-specific thing, but it is an issue where we're trying to strengthen our economy. We've also got a focus on what's coming next. So Sheffield has been through a number of major economic shocks in the past, and we know the damage that that can do. With the pandemic, with changes in the economy, it's really important that our skills and education system is set up for the skills of the future, particularly around green skills as our economy transitions to net zero, and around digital skills and automation as we see technology changing the jobs that people do in the city. There's a lot more that could be said on that, as you can see from the documents, but that's probably the sort of key points to make here. And then if you wouldn't mind just going on to the last one. The other really important foundation to the strategy has been the consultation work which has gone into it. It's been undertaken really at the strategic level through this strategy development stage, and that's going to be further continued in the action stage, which Laura will come on to. I think you've got a paper setting out the specific organisations who've been involved, but in summary, the work's been driven by the members of the Task and Finish group. It's been led by the CSAB board, who we've consulted with on a number of occasions, and then the missions and priorities, which we'll come on to in a moment, have been tested and refined with a wide range of stakeholder groups, external partners and internal teams within the council. The feedback from those sessions has been used to refine and iterate the missions, the vision and the priorities, and the feedback shared with the wider consultees so that they could see what others have said. So it's very much been an iterative process to get this far. And I'll pause.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've tried to use both quantitative and qualitative data to inform the strategic framework that you'll see next. And I've just asked Paul if he'll just give a flavour of his view of the evidence base from the voluntary sector. We're very much on the front line seeing a lot of this happen, if it rings true to him and if he wants to put any additional flavour to the data. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, and I think so I chair a group of providers that all work on the front line, all in areas of deprivation, and we've had opportunities to feed into this. And what I think is really good about this is my thing was going to be that averages often mask inequalities, and I'm really pleased that Cassie said that. But I think that's really what the report does well, is that you have your averages, but actually it does really draw up that we've got massive inequalities. There's growth, but where we are going backwards is in areas of disadvantage. Ethnic minority employment is going backwards whilst white employment is going up. So I think it highlights that there are significant areas to address in areas of deprivation and in particularly minoritised communities. So I'm really pleased that the strategic document does that. And I think that's an area where the voluntary sector is a real asset to the city. And I think that what you can't get in one of these documents is all of the complexities of why those stats are like they are. But I think there's a firm commitment to work really collaboratively to address them, so it does feel quite positive.
Thank you. We'll hand over for questions for this part.
Okay, so who doesn't want to ask a question? So it's usual, I'll start with Nikki, then Joe. Then I usually go one question each from each of the groups. So we'll go Nikki, Joe, Henry, and then yourself.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to say what an impressive tool it is. Very powerful and useful potentially. It would be quite, I think there's a lot of people in the city who would like to use it, so it would be helpful to know if there could be like even a sort of basic training or overview on how to access it and sort of use it for what people actually want to use it for. I suppose just two questions. One, how often will that data be updated? I'm sure you draw it from lots of different sources, but it's great, the idea that it will be there and constantly updated and people being able to use it. I just wanted to, this might not be the right section to ask this, but just wanted to ask, there was the employment rates for disabled people that you quoted? Was it 50%? Right, so probably actually going back to Paul's point about the numbers hiding even further what's behind it. So I know nationally for autistic people, employment rates are actually half that again, nearer to 26%. So this isn't a question, it's just a suggestion. Looking at the Buckland Review of Employment for Autistic People, which came out earlier this year, which was supported by a lot of the autistic groups and charities, and it's got some great recommendations that could be shared with employers and built into the strategy. So thank you.
Oh yes, the data, so you're right, there are a lot of different data sources in there and they update intermittently and at different points in time. So for example, the employment number, which I said there's been a 10,000 increase, the next iteration of that is the 17th of October, but each data source updates at a different point in time. So yeah, that will be a sort of ongoing process of keeping that updated.
But it will be updated and it's a live tool. Yeah. We'll have to look at how best to do that on an ongoing basis. Maybe a video tutorial would be a really good way to access that, so we can have a look at that. Yeah.
So we've got Joe next, and then that would be Henry after that.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the report. I found the skills thing on a link in the web version of the report. So I found it. Look, I think it's really interesting. I'm particularly looking at the digital skills needs and the workers at risk of automation sections. And my background is software development, so it's interesting to see how how things are playing at the moment. My observation on that is that really, what would be really useful if I wanted to go back into it, which I don't, not just the headlines, but it's all extremely granular. The strategically important information is not just do we need more programmers, it's what do we need it, what specific tools, what specific skills do we need it? And it is very much understanding the specifics. And so I'm glad to see this because it's more specific than I've ever seen a report like this in the past. But really understanding and therefore really being able to deliver means understanding in some cases extremely specific skills and experience. On workers at risk of automation, I was surprised to see the list including things like table waiting staff, which I would have thought very hard to automate. I would expect the workers at risk of automation to be, if the promises of ChatGPT come true, which they may not, but if they do, there's an awful lot of middle management who read and write reports. A lot of council officers possibly, who could be replaced by a computer. Now, the computer so far can't tell truth from fiction, and therefore you're safe for the moment. But I just want to query the judgment there that it's people who do physical jobs such as table waiting, as opposed to processing information. Are they really those that are at risk?
Just first off on the digital element, there is a lot more data as well besides that. So the local skills improvement plans that the chambers have been leading on behalf of South Yorkshire has really focused in on digital skills where they're needed to be increased, as well as some of the areas at risk of automation. So there's even more data there if you're interested in it. And just from an automation perspective, I have been in restaurants where robots are delivering food, so it definitely is starting to happen. Yeah, they have like cat faces on, which my children like, but I don't. So yeah, there are a mix of jobs, I think, that are at risk of automation. So yeah, did you want to add anything else?
I was just going to say that, especially in relation to digital skills, change happens very quickly. So whatever we write in this report today, probably next year you could write something different. And there are areas where it's relatively easy to automate menus on an app. So many young people nowadays don't talk to the waiter, they just order by an app. But over time, the range of jobs that will be affected will increase. So the pace of change is going to quicken, I think.
Great. Paul, did you want to?
I suppose our experience at the moment with people with low skills is that it's already far harder to get work. So warehousing, last year, pretty easy to get jobs in warehousing. This year, already seeing a big cut in that. So, I mean, I don't know if that's automation or something else, but it's those sort of entry-level jobs are dwindling, and the skill level required for them is going up. So they're becoming more inaccessible. Henry.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for all the work that's gone into this. Very thorough, as my colleagues have mentioned. It's great to see a strong focus on transformational jobs and jobs of the future. But I've also had several businesses contact me and talk to me about struggling to fill jobs in what you would consider traditional engineering roles, maintenance, fitters, machine operators, things like that. And anecdotally, what I'm being told is because people at the age of 16 aren't interested in going into those jobs. And obviously you can't base a strategy on anecdotes. So as part of the data analysis, have we done a sort of gap analysis of where sectors are struggling to recruit and where people at the age of 16 are interested in going into, if that makes sense?
Thanks. Cassie mentioned during the presentation the foundational economy, and certainly, the economies that are involved in those are things like construction, early years, warehousing, engineering, and really those jobs that have the critical mass of entry-level opportunities for people and are struggling to recruit, and therefore a real opportunity for people in Sheffield to get in and get on in employment, essentially. So where the growth plan will focus on Sheffield specialisms, which may be, higher productivity roles, but that require much higher skills to get into, the employment and skills strategy will unashamedly, in addition, focus on the foundational economy as well as an important area that, as Cassie said, actually provide 2/3 of the opportunities, the job opportunities in Sheffield. I think the important thing is that, you know, the job market is, the labour force has shrunk and will continue to shrink, and we need to ensure that the Indigenous population of Sheffield are able to take those roles and progress in those roles. And for those roles, we want to focus support on making sure that employment is good in those areas, so it pays well, it offers inclusive recruitment practices, and it offers progression and upskilling within them.
Do you just want to say anything about the data in this area? It is tricky.
It is tricky because there's such a wide range of jobs and such a wide range of skills that might be the issue and the barrier to recruitment. There is some sort of quite broad data on recruitment difficulties and hard to fill jobs, but actually if you're looking at a specific geography and then a specific sector and then a specific type of job, the data becomes quite unreliable and it does become anecdote quite quickly. So anecdotes are important, you know, that qualitative feedback and engagement with businesses is really important in terms of telling us the direction that the city's going in and the challenges that they're facing. So I think the quantitative data there is probably not as strong as we'd want it, but that engagement with businesses, which the council officers doing on a regular basis, the work that the chambers do regularly to feed in skills needs is going to influence the development of the actions that come next.
Yeah, there is a lot of anecdotal evidence in this area. So where the data points to national skills shortages, usually we have evidence of that through businesses talking to us or some of the local survey data the chamber do to kind of back that up. And there's a number of reasons for that. It can be technical skill level, like Laura's pointed out, or it can be that industry isn't seen as attractive to young people. So that's where programmes like See It, Be It can be really useful in terms of educating young people about what careers are actually like. So it is a complex area that you need to keep your ear to the ground on, really.
Thank you. Just mindful, colleagues, that we've got 2 other sections to go. So I'm going to take questions from people already indicated, and then there'll be a chance to ask a question on anything at the end. I might log one in myself. Next, I've got Julie, followed by Tony.
Thank you, Chair. Nice to see you, Cassie. Long time no see. Thank you for all this work. It's incredibly important for the future of the city, and it's good to see that we are on top of it. I just want to get to some real practicalities of it, if I may. You touched, Cassie, on the geographical divide, and then Paul, you followed that up by talking about, you know, unemployment in the areas of deprivation. So my questions are, I am assuming they are one and the same, the areas where we've got the geographical difficulties or the areas where we have deprivation. So have we identified those areas clearly, and how do we plan for the future to make sure that we are growing the economy and the jobs and the skills in those specific areas? I mean, we've got some great examples across the city in relation to the work that's going on in Attercliffe and, you know, the advanced manufacturing park and places. So it's just having a real practical understanding of what we're doing, not just the high level view that we're taking at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, we do have the data at locality level. It's actually on that system as well. So we're very aware of where geographically some of this data is biting the most. And we're always aware of that. So a lot of our employment and skills programmes are already working in communities, with communities, to make sure that our services are serving that local need, reflecting what it is in those areas given the data. So we do local job fairs. We work with community organisations through our commissioning. So a lot of the providers that we use are local voluntary organisations. And we also make sure that they can input into what we're commissioning as well. So we commission both on a community and geography basis, but also into some of those inequalities across different groups as well. So we are absolutely aware of that and working into that. I think the issue is that there's just not enough. So if you look at the amount of work that we can do and the number of people we can touch, actually you need 10 times that to be able to really get to everybody who's in the economy. It's always been an issue of scale in terms of what we can do. But we do use the council's investment and shared prosperity fund to really gap fill the national provision and speak directly into the point that you are talking around inequalities. It's just that we need to do much more of that in the future.
Tony?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your report. It's very interesting, and it's quite a very it's a good initiative that we're working on here. I suppose really to get people working again, and that's the main idea of growing the economy. To get there's so many people, especially young people now, that are not working, and even in needs, you know. So my question really is, how do we get to those that are hard to reach, to get them back working again, to help to get the economy moving? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I mean, I think we'll be covering this more in the next steps. So at the moment, we're presenting today the evidence baseline. Cassie's going to go on in a minute to the strategic framework. And then the next step after that is to work to look at the really good practice that, as Councillor Grocott says, we've got in the city that we can scale and build on and identify the gaps as well.
Barbara.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for an excellent report. I mean, I'm really it's touching on what you said about the unemployment in the BAME community, but I'm linking it with what Henry said about lack of qualifications. Now, traditionally, unless you've actually are an immigrant with a specific job for a specific skill, you tend to have, the only opportunities you have are the very low paid jobs. Now, in the past, there were lots in Sheffield, so that person could come in, you know, build up the pot so their children wouldn't suffer. And we know those sorts of jobs are going. But at the moment, we're getting a lot of people in with really high-level qualifications in their home country, but they cannot work appropriate to their skills simply because their qualifications aren't recognised. And I've taught people with sort of very limited English knowledge, but you know, engineers in their own country, and they cannot get employment. The only employment offered to them is something that is very, very low paid. Any chance of looking at how we look at the existing qualifications that these people have to employ them in a more fruitful way? Because that, I'm sure, would help not only current industries, but also would help to sort of narrow the gap. Because, of course, if their children are seeing their parents sort of really working all hours and just not making any money, what incentive is there for them to work? Thank you.
We are absolutely aware of that, and we've been doing some pilots on certain areas, in areas of skill gaps, actually, like engineering, where we have got qualifications and working on that. Sometimes we can get the qualifications acknowledged. Others, it's more difficult to do that, and the language gap is an issue, but we are absolutely aware of that being the case. Did you want to say anything more, Paul?
Yeah, so we've run a project for nearly 20 years supporting refugees into volunteering and now into employment, and there are some barriers that you can address locally. Quite a lot of them are national barriers or industry barriers. So you know, like medicine, for example, there's a one route. There are some really positive routes. So there's some of those operate at regional level. So there's a refugee nurses program, which is around supporting nurses back into work. Other mayoral combined authorities run other programs specifically around how you reintegrate refugees. South Yorkshire doesn't have quite as an advanced program as other areas do, but I think what we've done locally with lottery funding is trying to get people, and a lot of it is relational, but there's multiple and complex barriers with employers being fearful. Key is ESOL provision, because you can't do anything without good ESOL provision, and the advanced one. But I think that's on the case, and in Laura's team, she's working with us to really do that piece of work. Who have we got who's in the city now underemployed? And that's something we're doing. And the other thing we've done with, you know, a lot of it's contracts. So most contracts, you can't work with someone who's got a job. So we've managed to get some flexible funding. So our staff work with people who are in work, but a lot of the UK SPF, ESF funding, if someone's got a job, you can't help them. You can only help someone out of work. So these are structural funding barriers that aren't always locally controllable.
Thank you. I mean, I've always heard the hard luck stories and dealt with the really difficult cases, so it's reassuring to know that sort of, you know, someone has paid attention to it. Thank you.
Thanks for that, colleagues. And just before we move on to the next section, I'm going to take the chair's prerogative. We have quite rightly honed in on the areas of challenge for Sheffield and the key issues that we need to address. But perhaps you'd like to take the opportunity of highlighting a couple of areas where Sheffield is doing relatively well, just for the sake of balance.
Yeah, so certainly there are areas of strength in Sheffield, and there is a resurgence in some parts of the city's economy. I think the overall growth within employment comes back to what we were saying about the averages. On a lot of indicators, Sheffield performs pretty well for a northern urban city. Employment has been growing. GVA, the economic output of the city, has been growing relatively quickly compared to what we have seen in recent years. The number of business starts is increasing. So there's a lot of positive things happening in Sheffield. We want to accelerate and strengthen those whilst also ensuring that that doesn't come at the expense of the people who aren't benefiting from it already.
In addition to that, I would just add that our two universities are a great asset in terms of providing a pipeline of graduates that we know want to stay and work in Sheffield. There's always people talk about wanting to work and stay in Sheffield and having good retention for the first jobs. And we have made a really good progress. If you look at long term, which you have to on economic measures a lot of the time, the last 10 and 15 years, the skills profile of the city has changed dramatically. When you compare our skills profile to other core cities, it is good. There is probably more of an issue around underemployment and the level of jobs, the number of jobs we've got at kind of the level 4 level, which connects into some of the growth plan work and analysis that we've been doing that's talking about how do you grow some of those knowledge-intensive jobs so that we can keep our level 4 qualified people in the city. So I really encourage the focus on the inequality and the deprivation elements of an economic activity, but it is also important that we recognise the role of employment and skills in those growth areas and the knowledge economy as well. Thanks.
Thanks for that. So should we move on to the next section?
Chair, can I suggest that we do the next two sections together because it's quite quick, the next steps, and I think it'll work well. Thanks.
Fine with you?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Could you move on to? Thank you. So in terms of that was a really helpful discussion about the foundations and the evidence which underpins the strategy. I'll now move on to the sort of overarching structure of the strategy, which we call the strategic framework. If you would just go on to the next one. Again, this is explained in the documents, and this one slide gives a summary of the strategy. I'll talk you through it because there's a lot to see. So overall, this gives you a picture of the sort of structure. At the centre, very small, is an overarching vision. Then there are 3 high-level missions, and then sitting underneath each mission, a series of priorities. And I've got separate slides on those. So,
yeah, and they're on page 33 in your pack.
Yep. You don't need to squint. The full vision is in the document pack, but the things which I'll just pick out from the sort of short form, which is included in the diagram, is really the things we've touched on already, really, that the strategy is about people from all backgrounds and all communities, absolutely addressing those geographic disparities, those areas of disadvantage. Is particularly prioritised through the strategy. It's about enabling the city to prosper, making sure that people are sort of properly rewarded for the work that they do and tackling that area of low wage employment in our city. It's about people being enabled to live healthy and fulfilling lives. So we know how important employment is, not just in its economic sense, but in terms of the benefits, the well-being it brings to people, and the meaning that it can give to people if it is good work. And it's also about an employment and skills system that enables our city to be successful. And that system needs to be flexible, it needs to be forward-looking, and it needs to be responsive to the needs and the priorities of Sheffield. The 3 missions flow directly from the evidence base. You can see them there. Increase equity and fairness. We've had that discussion about making sure that this isn't just an average increase and we don't address the disparities. So increasing equity and fairness is one of the 3 missions. enable and accelerate good economic growth. So as Di was saying there, the importance of employment and skills in that economic growth for the city, and then developing skills for a sustainable future. And if you would just hop on to the next one. This just shows you the priorities then that sit underneath each of the missions. So the first one about enabling and accelerating good economic growth is really about addressing the low skill and low wage economy that we've highlighted earlier, and increasing the number of higher level jobs in Sheffield, the number of well-paid jobs in Sheffield, and the pathways that people have to get to those jobs. So fostering ambition and aspiration, encouraging career curiosity, making people aware of the opportunities that are available in the city, upskilling the workforce so that they can realise their potential, increasing the availability of quality employment, driving innovation enterprise, and developing and attracting and retaining talent. So focusing on that sort of economic growth aspect of employment and skills. The second one, thank you, increase equity and fairness, as we were talking about, addressing inequality of health, wealth and opportunity in the city through maximising economic activity, tackling the disparities that we have, supporting working people with regard to their rights so that people get fair employment, working with a thriving and sustainable voluntary and community sector, and improving life chances and career choices. So at any stage of people's lives, they're able to access the support that they need. And then the final one is about developing skills for a sustainable future. So this is equipping Sheffield's people, Sheffield's businesses, the employment and skills system with the capabilities they need to deal with economic change and economic shocks. The first one there is really about being resilient and being forward-looking, and then around specific skills for the future, green skills, digital skills, reskilling in response to economic change, and really maximising the opportunities through social value, through the investments that are going to be made in the city to develop that skilled workforce for the future. Laura.
Thank you. Do you want to do next steps?
Okay, so I just want to talk about next steps briefly. So obviously today's an exciting day for us to bring to you the, sorry, do you want to just go on to the next slide? Thanks. To bring to you this paper. We look forward to getting some feedback on the strategy framework, and then we'll obviously take account of that in the document. But then October and November is where we really roll our sleeves up, and I think some of the members have helpfully said so exactly what is it you're going to do. And that's what that's a really important piece of the work, is to come up with the actions, the people who are going to deliver them, the timescales they're going to be delivered within. We are developing a long list of those with the Task and Finish group and with the Sheffield Employment and Skills Advisory Board. And then we go on to the important second round of consultation. That initially will be with the strategic partners that we mentioned before, but a bit more widely to include schools, etc. And then the important thing is to make sure when we've got that more tangible set of actions is that that is tested with service users. So we intend to speak to some focus groups of people in the community with the support of the voluntary and community sector. We're going to go to some students at the Sheffield College and other providers. We're going to speak to the Youth Council. And really importantly, we're going to speak to sectors because, you know, for instance, you can imagine we're going to have things in there probably like increasing apprenticeships. Well, that will be different for early years to warehousing to digital, etc. So we're going to go to some specific sector groups to work up to some sector plans. And then finally, finish off the document, complete the action plan and bring it back to committee hopefully in December.
Thank you, Laura. And I'd just like to invite Andrew to talk about how he's on the CSAB group, but how that group has been involved in developing the strategic framework and what it means for Sheffield College.
Thanks, Di. So, as Di has said, I'm on the Skills Employment, Sheffield Employment Skills Advisory Board, and I think it's really pleasing to see the amount of consultation that has gone on with strategic partners and how this strategy has iterated through as a key partner in the city in this arena. And I think I can speak on behalf of fellow board members. You know, there's been that opportunity to contribute to the development of the strategy, to input into it, to test ideas. And what we've seen as the work has gone on is how that has been reflected in the documents that have come forward. So you can see that I think points that have been made have been listened to and have been addressed, and it really does feel now it's coming together as a very sharp piece of work. I think as Laura has said, I think we're now getting to that point of looking forward to rolling up our sleeves and getting stuck into the actions, because at the end of the day, and this is the point around consultation and engagement, it is about partners owning the strategy, getting behind it, and then delivering it. And I think we've done that to good effect so far.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of quick things for the benefit of the tape. Councillor Said is with us. Hi, glad you're here. I'll take any questions, colleagues, and I'm going to give preference to people, including Ibby, who didn't get a question in the first lot. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've got a question and a comment. I'll probably make the question first, maybe comment at the end.
Be as greedy as you like there.
As well, thank you to all our officers for the tremendous work that's gone into developing the Sheffield Employment and Skills Strategy to this stage. I'd like to also thank all our partners and stakeholders who have been involved in the various consultation stages thus far. My question, Chair, is related to the use of average and how average masks perhaps poverty and deprivation and low income in certain areas of our city and certain communities. I would like to know, perhaps for the benefit of the public, how will this strategic framework address this? That's my question. I'll make a comment at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's clearly one of the whole missions that we want to focus in on. And I think when we've got to the action stages and the next iteration of this, we will have measures against which we will assess ourselves. So internally at the moment, we look at employment rates at like the highest and the lowest across the city to look at those disparities. The data's there in this data set around ethnic minorities or people with disabilities. So we can measure those. Now they're mainly annual measures, so we don't get an acid test. We also have been commissioning projects. So we have an employment support project that works with people with autism. So we've got outputs of our programs that we're actually delivering at the moment. So the economy is a big thing, so we can't say that figure is going to change because of the action that we're specifically taking, but there's two lines. One is our performance on the things that we're commissioning and delivering, so we can see the outputs that we're achieving, and then we'll monitor the data as well. So as part of the strategic framework around this, we would expect that we will set some measures for each of those, so we'll be able to hold to account. And I think the way of looking at that deprivation average point is to look at different ward or areas of the cities, their employment rates, much more in detail, which they're on the system, so we can access that data, but it's making sure we're closing the gap between the best and the worst.
I've got Councillor Nottage. Anybody else? Nikki?
Very quick follow-up to your response to Councillor Uller. In terms of granularity for the geographical areas, are we able to go way below ward level to something like super output area? Because there's lots of wards where at a ward level everything's rosy, but there are pockets in there that we really need to focus on.
Yes, so some data, it depends on the data set. And for those who aren't stat heads, super output areas are little geographies that make up bigger geographies that you can look at from a data perspective. So each ward is made up of a number of super output areas, so you can analyse at that level. So yeah, it might not make sense to some people, but you can zone in at that different level. There are some tools that actually help you do that, so you don't actually need to know the super output area. You can put your cursor on a bit of the map and it'll help you identify that. But yes, so where we can access that level of data. So if we also actually have been doing some work with LACs around LAC profiles where we access some of that data as well. So a lot of this already exists. If you'd like us to put a bit of a pack together of where you can get data and access to some of those resources that are already out there, then we'd be more than happy to do that. And the tool that Cassie's kind of produced as part of this commission will be one of the key areas as well to look at.
That's just a comment from the chair. That's a very good question, Henry. I know, representing a ward from one of the more affluent parts of Sheffield, there are still pockets of relative disadvantage. But yeah, that's a very good question. Nikki, I think you wanted to indicate.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the list of all the people who've been involved in the consultation. That's really useful. And it was good to hear that schools will be involved in the next stage. And I've worked in several local schools and helped found one of our local multi-academy trusts. And I've seen the huge pressures on them. And I suppose, as well as I'm aware of the huge potential they have to influence young people and the pathways that they take and the choices that they make. So I'm interested in how they'll be involved in that next stage, and I suppose also recognising the difficulties with that, in that we have multi-academy trusts under a regional schools commissioner rather than under a local authority, so even coordinating that is quite difficult. And I also know, as I'm sure my colleague does, how stretched schools are and how I'm sure they've got valuable insights, but creating a process that enables them to engage in a really meaningful way is going to be quite challenging. They have so much on their plate already. So if extra efforts could go into that, and also thinking about some of the tensions there are between different institutions, so with the UTCs trying to recruit students aged 14, and it's taken things like national legislation like the Baker Clause to make sure that schools do allow UTCs in to talk to their students. Given one of the things we found in different parts of the city, sort of trying to encourage aspiration amongst students, which, if anybody's got a book on how to do that, it's hugely difficult. So it feels like they're really important stakeholders, but it's going to be quite difficult to get meaningful engagement from them. So I'd just be interested in how that might work.
Thank you. We have got some of these routes established through the City Goals process, so we will look to utilise some of those areas. But we do use Learn Sheffield as a place that pulls schools together, so we can present at their board meetings. We've also got colleagues from Lifelong Learning and Skills here and the See It Be It programme, business in the community who have access into schools that we can utilise. So what I don't think we're going to do is go in cold calling, door knocking on a range of different schools. We're going to use established routes that we've already got ways into. In terms of making that meaningful, I do agree about the timings of that. So we potentially can do a knowledge briefing online for them, some workshops, and if there's appetite to do something with a number of schools, we can go to them. So we'll look into that in terms of how they want to work with us on that next stage and take their advice on some of that as well. But we'll make sure we do more in that consultation area.
Thank you. That's really reassuring. And I suppose the other bit I forgot to mention was around sort of the fragmentation of careers advisors as well. And I know a lot of schools buy that in. I wanted to say the See It Be It project is brilliant, really good, and more of that, please. My only point on what you said about engaging, particularly the trusts and the secondary schools, and I could be wrong because it's several years since I was involved, but when I was, most of those trusts didn't actually subscribe to Learn Sheffield and didn't take part, so I think that may not be the best way to engage some of those bigger trusts.
I guess one comment from me. relating back to what I said before, again, we're rightly focusing on the areas where we need to improve and the issues we need to address. But we mustn't forget that, for example, the areas where we do have relative strength, how can we become even stronger? If we can make sure we build that into it as well. But yeah. Councillors, if there are no other questions, Ibby, you look as though you want to ask one.
I've got comments, sir.
No. Another one?
No, I didn't make comments.
Of course.
In terms of a very diverse ward, what Councillor Nottage mentioned earlier, I represent a very diverse ward. Netherwich is relatively affluent, and Sharrow, unfortunately, is not so affluent. I just want to say that I really welcome this employment and skills strategy to this stage. I believe that it lays the foundation for our city's long-term prosperity. It's great to see that increasing equity and fairness is at the heart of this strategic framework, ensuring that people from all backgrounds and communities live and have the opportunity to prosper and live healthy and fulfilling lives in our city. It's also encouraging to see that this framework emphasizes the need to accelerate good economic growth, not growth at any cost. So I look forward to the next stage of development, which I believe will be creating roadmaps and concrete action plans to deliver on the identified priorities. Thank you very much.
So, if there are no more comments, we'll move on to the recommendations, colleagues. So, the Economic Development Skills Policy Committee is recommended to note the progress made to develop the Sheffield Employment and Skills Strategy, approve the vision and strategic framework elements of the strategy, and to approve adoption of the draft evidence-based report and evidence-based data set. In plain English, we're saying thank you very much and moving on to the next stage of the project and the study. Does everybody agree with that? Any dissents? In that case, that's unanimous. Thank you ever so much for coming today, and thank you very much for the work you're doing. So that brings us on to agenda item 9, which is on the topic of post-UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And just as a reminder, colleague, there is a small appendix which has closed information. So if anybody wants to ask a question on that closed appendix, we'll have to go into closed session. And if you do, it would be helpful to have that at the end. But don't feel obliged if you don't want to. So, Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Ben Morley, Head of Programmes and Accountable Body within Economic Development and Skills and Culture, part of Di's team. This paper follows, I think, at least 2 previous papers in respect of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, where we've identified it being as a major component of our funding to deliver locally developed and locally delivered activity in relation to business support, to community development activity and skills and employability activity. And when we first came here, it was to announce it was a replacement of European funding. We secured 3 years of funding. In fact, every local authority area across the country was allocated UK SPF, and in our case it was provided via the combined authority with an allocation specifically to Sheffield. And you can see the value of that contribution within the paper, where the final year, which is this current year, means we have secured just over £9 million in those 3 core areas of activity.
we've been delivering Shared Prosperity Fund projects for 2.5 years now, and I'm very much on progress to commit all the funding, spend all the money by the end of the financial year. That's critical because the programme ends in March 2025, and the purpose of this paper is to actually identify the implications, because at the moment there is no alternative money being identified by government to replace Shared Prosperity Fund. That has implications which, in terms of actually what we do and what you do as a committee, are fairly fundamental in terms of those three areas of support. And the paper identifies through the first two appendices actually what the Shared Prosperity Fund has delivered, and I think has a number of case studies there which actually from a local community or from business perspective, you can see the real value that it's brought to residents and businesses over the past 2.5 years, and will continue to do so till the end of the programme in March next year. With a lack of clarity in terms of replacing Shared Prosperity Fund, we've been working to see if we can identify alternative funding to avoid, which I think something you'll hear quite a lot of in forthcoming reports and papers, a cliff edge of public support for activity, particularly through local authorities. And to this effect, we've identified a number of funds which can carry on the activity which we think is really valuable for the city for at least another 12 months, should there not be a replacement programme provided by government or directly from the combined authority itself. And the paper identifies three of those areas of funding. One is in relation to previous European programme, where we've been able to secure funding which has been paid directly to the council, but didn't actually have to be spent on the activity associated with it, together with some funding which was set aside to deal with redundancy and potential clawback associated with that programme. And that's a reasonable sum of money, between £2.5 and £3 million. We've also been able to set aside some money actually from the Shared Prosperity Fund activity itself, where we are provided with funding towards on-costs associated with delivery, and that's money's been collected over the past 2 years, and again sits in a very similar position where we might be able to deploy that for future activity. And the final there is, some of you may have reasonable memories of the Leggy programme, which was operated probably 10 years ago now. And one of the projects supported through that programme was a provision of loans to businesses, start-up businesses and social enterprises. The repayments of those loans actually have generated a pot of about £600,000, and that potentially is available again to replace Shared Prosperity Fund should there not be anything replaced by government. Those are all one-off pots of funding. If we use those, they're gone. We've also brought to committee in previous papers information about the Gain Share programme, which is controlled by the combined authority, for which there is, in terms of revenue funding, and the bulk of Shared Prosperity Fund money is revenue funding, an allocation of Sheffield of £4 million a year. We're in our current first year of flexible funding in terms of that respect, and potentially going forward, the Gain Share funding could be used towards some of the activity which Shared Prosperity Fund has provided. So what the paper sets out is potentially subject to satisfying finance colleagues that funding is actually available and free to use in the ways we've identified, a way to mitigate the loss of Shared Prosperity funding at least for 12 months. Thereafter, Gain Share funding isn't at the same quantum as the SPF in the final year, so that would leave us with an issue should the committee and should the combined authority agree that that's the best use of that Gain Share funding. So it's not in our rights, as it were, to determine that completely. So the paper, as I say, sets out those mitigations to the loss of Share Prosperity Fund. The recommendations are seeking committee's approval to the approach of, subject to agreeing with finance colleagues, that the use of that one-off funding is made available to deal with the next 12 months should SPF not be available, and likewise in terms of gain share. And it also recommends that the leader of the council highlights to government the value of Share Prosperity Fund and seeks at least another year's funding, whilst we as a region, through the combined authority, look to see how a single assessment in particular might be a way to address SPF should government not continue it going forward. I should add, in respect to that particular position and the leader, he is currently being requested to sign a letter from all South Yorkshire leaders together with the mayor of the mayoral combined authority, highlighting these very issues and the importance of a continuation of some sort or another to enable this local-led and local-delivered programme.
Thank you. Can I just add one thing just about the context right now is very changeable. So Shared Prosperity Fund is obviously moving. We've got new government. We're not sure what some of those new programmes might be. There's talk of a single settlement, maybe 26, 27. The issue is that some of these programmes are ending now, and if we let that cliff edge happen, the local infrastructure, which includes jobs and organisations in the voluntary sector as well as in the council, will be removed, and it will be difficult to then bring that back. Employment and skills activity needs certainty over the medium term. It doesn't work on a one-year basis if you're trying to work with somebody who's economically inactive and got a number of years. You're taking them on a journey. So we need to give some stability in terms of what we do next. And so this is really about creating that bridge until we've got more certainty. So it's not that we're not going to look at the viability of our programmes, reshape and rescope. Certainly the employment and skills strategy that we've just seen will help to rescope and reshape what we want to do going forward, as well as our growth plan. So I'm aware that there might be change over the next 12 to 18 months, but what we don't want to do is stop everything to try and restart what we want to keep on the longer term. So we're trying to create a transition period where we retain expertise, staff, and keep the activity running so there's not a hole in the community programmes. Thanks.
Thank you. Before I come to councillors, just so praising what I've read there, the looming cliff edge, it accounts for about 70%, I think is in there, of the Business Sheffield activity, business support work in Sheffield. So it's the loss, without going into detail, the loss of that would be pretty catastrophic.
Yeah, there's impacts across all of this. So the majority of our programme activity in terms of grants for Business Sheffield is funded through this. The majority of staff and activity for employment and skills, culture and tourism, all the programming activity that we've done in culture, and there's been a cost of living community development pot that's been available. So all of that would go, yeah.
So I have three people this side. Anybody this side want to ask a question? Okay, we'll go Joe first, and then Henry, and then we'll go.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, thank you for bringing this to us. I think, I share the concerns about the funding and the future of the programme. I'm just a little bit curious. You said the gain share, the quantum wouldn't be available in future to the extent that it is right now. I'm slightly puzzled by that. Have I understood correctly? The gain share is the 30-year commitment from the coalition for regular funding for the city region for regeneration, effectively. So I accept that. The replacing withdrawn SPF, which is replacing European funding, that is kind of standing still rather than getting extra regeneration, but it's the spending in the right form. But that's a 30-year commitment. Is there a reason that quantum is going down? I'm aware the mayor wants to spend some on the airport, which I can understand, as a useful thing. But is there a reason the quantum is going down? I'm also aware that Dan Jarvis wanted to borrow against it in order to spend it all in one go. So I think we can all be pleased that he wasn't successful in doing that, because you never know what may come along. But my goodness, it just shows how useful, doesn't it, that a long-term commitment to fund local government effectively that is flexible in how it can be spent, how useful that is, if it saves our business support, if it saves the airport, and if it does all the, you know, all the other things that it is. It's an example of how funding of local government ought to be done, isn't it? I hope lessons are learned. But sorry, to go back to the question, what is it about the quantum?
So the gain share allocation came to South Yorkshire on the deal, as you referred to, £30 million for 30 years. The first few years, the funding was allocated to individual projects, which came to the combined authority. More recently, 2 years ago now, the decision was to actually allocate gain share to each of the local authorities and a retained amount to the combined authority as well to support regional projects. That results in the way the funding was divvied up between the five authorities in effect, was broadly about £10 million per annum for Sheffield going forward. The bulk of the capital funding is being directed towards our large capital projects, and that's £6 million. And then there's £4 million, or just shy of £4 million of revenue activity. So what this report is identifying is potentially that £4 million of revenue going forward could contribute towards the activity which potentially we might be losing. But if the table I referred to at the very start of the report shows that currently we actually have £9 million worth of Shared Prosperity Fund coming into Sheffield, which is our sort of our full allocation. It's been ramped up, so that 4 million and 9 million will left with the 5 million gap based on those pure numbers as it stands at the moment.
So it was the quantum of spending available if SPF is moved that's reducing, not the gain share quantum.
Right, I understand. I think I misunderstood what you said originally. Okay, so the gain share is not reducing. No, okay. Thank you.
We'll go Henry and then Ibby.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. And it must be very frustrating having cliff edge after cliff edge after cliff edge to deal with where the European Structural Fund goes and then SPF is potentially going. And obviously very keen to keep all of the great work that's been done under this committee going and moving forward. The two things, we're going to go to finance with, to request approval for all of these pots of money that you've managed to stitch together to form some continuation and some buffer that's going to protect us. If they have problems with any of that, when will that come back to this committee?
We'll bring it back as soon as possible.
And likewise, there's a few ifs and buts about what's going to happen next October with the budget. You'd mentioned previously that one benefit of using the gain share funding to continue the work that's being delivered under SPF is it keeps us on our required spending profile for gain share. If we then get a continuation of SPF in some form from the government in the October budget, is there a risk that we're going to fall away from that required spending profile, and are there any implications to the council financially?
No, not as far as we're concerned, and as far as combined authority is concerned. In terms of gain share, it's a 5-year allocation, which they receive on an annual basis, but in effect approved every 5 years. And we understand the second tranche has been agreed, or in the process of being agreed. So we'll have another 5 years to spend the gain share, and there'll be plenty of additionality to a programme if we do get something else instead of having to use gain share to keep this core activity progressing. That would be really valuable to enhance what we do rather than just trying to maintain what we do.
So if we get thrown a bone by Whitehall, we'll definitely be able to find something else to spend the money on.
Yeah, I mean, just to be absolutely clear, our preference is that SPF is extended because the gain share money and its others can be invested in some of those areas that are underinvested in at the moment. The growth plan will identify, as well as the employment skills plan and the culture plan, lots of delivery that we need to do as a city. All of it could be pumped prime with the gain share money. So in no way do I think that we will not be able to spend that money. There is a lot of ideas, partner engagement that we could do, turning up some of the programmes we've already got, commissioning other things. So this is a plan B and should be a plan B. Our preference is absolutely that SPF money is continued to allow us to keep doing more rather than shrinking the programme to just keep the foundation elements alive.
Well, thanks a lot for the answer. I'll be watching the news with both fingers crossed.
Thank you. I think that was one question. Ibby.
Chair, once again, I'd like to thank our officers for developing an alternative plan B to prevent a cliff edge situation whilst exploring perhaps a more longer term funding solutions. I think it's very sensible that this is the way forward. I hope we can secure more longer term solutions to continue many of the wonderful projects that bring so much economic and social value to our city. Thank you.
I think we'd all agree to that, wouldn't we? And it's right, any comment from officers? I've got one person, Barbara.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the report, but it's horrifying, you know, sort of if we don't get the finance, because I know how businesses in my ward have really benefited from the work from the Business Advisory Service, as well as sort of all the other things like our LACs and that. And that, it worries me. You have mentioned that the warm spaces, hang on, sorry, let me get the appropriate thing. The Gain Share programme may not be used, or you suspect it won't be used for warm places. Is that correct? Now, there's going to be losers, whatever happens, but is it your responsibility to see if you can find another pot for that, because it includes development workers, or does that mean that responsibility will pass to another section, because it has huge implications for LACs? Thank you.
There's two parts to that. I think what we're identifying is not necessarily the case where Gain Share wouldn't support those. The way Gain Share and the economic programme which Simca are supporting is certainly some of those elements would probably struggle to be supported. Some elements might be, like community development workers, might be appropriate, but then there's going to be tough choices within that, because we identified that the 4 million a year, for example, doesn't get near the 9 million a year which we've had under this current financial year from Shared Prosperity Fund. So it's at risk both from eligibility and just amount of funding to be made available. We are in discussion with the communities team who have led on that part of the Shared Prosperity Fund programme. They are looking themselves at alternative sources of funding and other ways of doing their activity. I think if they were given the money again, they'd probably look at a slightly different programme of activity. So it's not been left incomplete, sort of that element falls off a cliff. That team are looking at their options to see what they can continue through whatever funding sources they can access, which would be very different from the hard economic type of activity which sits within DIE's area.
Oh, thank you, because it worries me with the sort of the likely increase in demand with the current changes to universal winter fuel payments and rise in sort of electricity sort of bills and, you know, the baseline. Thank you.
And finally, Julie.
Thank you. It's just building on the point that Barbara's raised. I think she's raised something that is incredibly important, so thank you for raising that and pointing it out. I was in a community meeting in my ward yesterday where where are we going to get the funding from to continue the warm spaces, because they are needed and we know that they're going to be more needed. So my couple of questions are really, you said, Ben, that looking at eligibility, so what exactly does that mean and who is looking at it? And if it isn't coming back to this committee, which committee will it be going to, and can we please, Chair, through you, raise it with that committee so that they are aware that it is coming and can make sure that they prioritise this, because we don't have the time, and we do know that because of decisions that the new government have made, that a lot of people are going to be in some real dire situations this winter. So I do think we need to get on top of this, and thank you, Barbara, for raising it.
I think that question in part was directed to me. Julie, yes, I will do that. To help me, could you send me an email with the specific activities you mentioned, because that will help me understand it and help me direct it to the appropriate person. Thank you. Officers, did you want to say anything on that?
Just to talk about the eligibility, the gain share revenue is primarily economic, and whereas SPF has had community elements to it, so that's where the eligibility might change. However, if SPF is extended, or the plan B that we're suggesting goes forward, there still should be some contribution towards the community theme. It's only if we have to reduce the programme just to gain share revenue that that eligibility becomes an issue. Is that right? Yeah.
So if there are no more questions, before I read out the recommendations, that it does, I mean, clearly some huge risks and huge uncertainties, which is never a good thing. And just go back to the point we said right at the beginning in terms of our work programme and the need to review the output or the impact of the budget. As far as this committee is concerned, clearly this is the first thing we want to know about. So if we can have, even if it's before the next committee meeting, a briefing of some sort at the earliest opportunity, I'm sure that would be very helpful, but I'm sure you've already tweaked that. That'd be great. So colleagues, we have a number of recommendations on page 46 of our deck. It's recommended that the Economic Development and Skills Policy Committee notes the programme and benefits of the UK Share Prosperity Fund and the implications should this funding cease to be available from next year. We note and support the development of mitigation options to minimise the negative implications of the potential loss of that fund. And then there are some sections I won't read out in detail, but it's approving the potential use of various pots of money subject to finance saying it's okay. And finally, we're requesting the leader of the council to continue to highlight the potential significant business and skills impact of the loss of the fund, to which I would add one small amendment. I think any of us that have any channels that can do the same, that would be a good thing to do. So, colleagues, are we agreed on those recommendations? I think it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Approved, and thanks very much for the report. So we have next the committee's year ahead. Item 10 in the deck, colleagues.
Thank you, everybody. This report goes through some of the achievements actually from the committee in the last 12 to 18 months, and I had the problem of having too much to put into this report, which was a really good problem to have. And it also sets out some of the activity areas that the three lead directors and the areas of activity that come under this committee are going to be focusing on over the next 12 months. This report is broader than the work plan because obviously some of that activity doesn't require committee decisions. So I think it's important to look at that alongside the work plan. If there are areas in this report that you would like more information on, briefing or information, you're very welcome to request any of that information, and we'll provide it to the committee either through an informal briefing, written, or through coming to committee. I wanted to note that since the committee started in 22 and the work that we've done, we've now got city goals and the council plan in place, which really gives us a strong footing to kind of make sure all of activity is pointed in the same direction to deliver those strategic objectives. So this paper also goes through our activity against some of those key objectives in the council plan to show how important this committee's work is on delivering against that. It also points to some of the work that we've done to put in place some of the strategic foundations for the economy going forward. You've commissioned the employment and skills strategy that you can see developing today. You commissioned the culture strategy, which is coming back to be adopted in October. You've agreed a destination management plan. And we've also signed up another lead accountable body for the local visitor economy partnership. You also look at the skills adult skills budget as well every year. So there's a lot of activity and progress that's been done in this area to set the long-term vision for the city as well. All of that has been informing the growth plan, which went as a strategic framework to Strategy and Resources Committee in 2023, and you'll be getting briefings and be invited to workshops to develop that, and it will come back to this committee after SNR as we go forward. So we're going to have some really strong plans of what we want to do with the city going forward, which in an economic area is really important, because we need confidence over the medium and long term to be able to talk to partners, to bring in investors, to give businesses confidence. So I just wanted to note the strategic work that the committee had done and is continuing to do in the next year, as well as some of the activity that it's delivered, and that's on pages 82 to 83. There's a really long list. Did you want to add anything to that, Richard, in terms of some of the areas that you've been focusing on?
Yes, so just to introduce myself, I'm Richard Smith. I'm the Interim Head of Lifelong Learning and Skills, and to some extent deputising for the Director for Early Years Education and Skills today. I won't read out the sections that we've added in this combined report. Suffice to say that Lifelong Learning and Skills continues to work with some of the most disadvantaged, and with our key and ongoing focus on core skills and developing support with health and well-being and people who are furthest from the labour market to get towards work. So there's a number of activities that have taken place over the last year around our adult education budget, whereby we are engaging with an increase of around 600 or 700 people to what we did last year. We're hoping to see that again increase this year. So we're trying to extend our reach, having been impacted post-pandemic by a reduction in numbers. And similarly, I will be coming back to a future committee around the multiply numeracy project. We've scheduled to do that now. So we want to report back on the impact of that, because that, a bit like Shared Prosperity, is a 3-year programme which comes to an end next March, I should say. So we want to talk beyond that around developments. We've mentioned Pride of Place, we've mentioned the See It Be It team and the important work that they're doing in schools, trying to raise aspirations and give young people the opportunity to see what benefits and what opportunities lie before them in the city. So again, we want to expand on that. I think that was mentioned earlier in terms of increasing the reach of that. Just by way of update, a recent event in the Winter Gardens saw over 130 pledges from local businesses to work with us on that, to go into schools and support in various different ways young people through the schools, whether that be experience of work, assembly presentations, opportunities to visit employers, etc., etc. So again, really wanting to build on that.
Thank you.
Okay.
The final point I would make is just the cross-cutting nature of this committee, and that across all 5 objectives in the council plan, we've got activity that impacts and really fits nicely across all of them. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a couple of observations of myself. Firstly, I never miss an opportunity to remind people about what the fantastic Ofsted report was for the Lifelong Learning and Skills team, particularly the Adult Education Service. Apologies if I'm embarrassing you with that again, but it really was great. So thank you. So my understanding is these are the general themes that we'll be looking at. And I think it's really important that we've got some of the cross-cutting ones in there, because something like, for example, the Graves building, which cuts across, I think, at least 3 committees. We've got to make sure that something as important as that doesn't fall through the cracks. So, yeah. So, any questions or observations on this? I'm not seeing any, so I think we're taking the recommendations on page 78, which is to note the progress made in 2023-24, recognising the work of members, officers and partners. We're considering the key issues identified in section 3, and we are agreeing to work in collaboration with other policy committees to make sure that those opportunities and issues are identified and progressed. So, are we all agreed? I'm seeing no dissent, so that is carried. Thank you. So we're on to item 11, colleagues, which is the Q1 budget monitoring report. Item 11 starts on page 97 of our deck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Jane Wilby, Assistant Director of Finance and Accounting and the Council's Deputy 151 Officer. The report that you've got presents the Council's 24-25 Q1 financial position and highlights the significant financial challenges that Sheffield City Council is currently facing, the drivers behind these challenges and the steps that we're taking to address them. The Council is projecting an overspend of 34.3 million for the 24-25 fiscal year. The overspend is approximately 7% of our net revenue budget, and the drivers are related to increased service demands, rising costs and reduced funding. The key areas affected are housing homelessness and adults and children's social care and SEN home to school transport. Inflation has been a significant contributor, increasing to the overall cost base, and in some cases service costs are rising above the rate of inflation. On top of this, funding levels have not kept pace with these rising costs, creating a significant funding gap. The fact remains that Sheffield has 26% less, or £858 per household, to spend in real terms when compared to 2010-11, and this reduction is well above the national average of approximately 18%, or £556 per dwelling. This is a severe reduction and has placed additional strain on our ability to deliver services. The Council has set aside reserves to manage the risk associated with budget delivery and expect to draw from this reserve to manage the year's overspend alongside a specific provision made to manage the housing benefit subsidy loss issue. Using reserves is a short-term solution and is not sustainable. This is a serious financial position, and our finance teams are working actively with officers across the Council to identify and implement cost-saving measures. We are developing strategies to manage and mitigate demand pressures, and efforts are being made to increase income wherever possible to address the overspend. The financial challenges are not unique to Sheffield. They are part of the broader trend affecting the entire public sector. Pressures across the NHS, schools, higher education and institutions, limiting the potential for future government relief. The Council's key response to these challenges is the Future Sheffield programme. This initiative is focused on transforming our services to create a more sustainable and efficient operating model. Transformation is essential so that we can continue to deliver statutory services whilst supporting city growth. Our transformation efforts are aligned with the Council's broader strategic goals and play a big part in our budget setting process this year. Our medium-term financial strategy, published in July, identified a budget gap of 68.9 million over the next 4 years, with 31 falling next year. Our focus is on long-term financial sustainability, which underscores the importance of the ongoing transformation efforts. The Economic Development and Skills Committee is forecasting to balance the budget against £10.4 million net revenue budget at Q1. The position represents a good financial management of service budgets, and the paper does note the income received for employment and skills from the UK SPF, which has been discussed earlier today. There is a piece of work that's underway between finance and commissioning teams alongside service colleagues to understand the potential scale of the impact across a variety of funding streams that are likely to fall away with uncertainty around the financial position. This is going to feed into our planning position, but as yet we have no clarity from government. We are facing a significant financial pressures and projected overspend, and we are taking immediate actions and engaging in longer-term transformation to address these challenges. The collaboration across the Council and strategic initiatives under the Future Sheffield programme are critical to navigating these challenges, and we are encouraging all departments to continue working closely with finance teams to contribute ideas for cost reduction, demand management and income generation. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions or take away if I'm unable to answer them today. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the comments. Yeah, I think we all know the situation. Any questions, colleagues? Thank you for coming. I'm sure the message is going out to all the committees to make sure they hit their budgets as close as they can. I'm pleased to see that thus far this particular committee is doing that, but I'm sure on behalf of everybody else, I really appreciate the work that officers are doing to try and keep to budget in these very difficult times. So if there's nothing else, colleagues, we have a recommendation that we note the updated information for the budget outturn and the monitoring information and actions provided. Are we all agreed on that? On seeing no dissent, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Yeah, fingers crossed. So my understanding is we have no other items on the agenda except the closed report. So, yeah, so I can close the meeting to the public in its entirety at the moment. Is that correct?
Yes, we have, yeah.
Sorry, for anybody watching, I'm just checking that we're doing things legally.
Right, yes.
Okay. So thank you, everybody, and thank you anybody that might be watching, but unfortunately we do have to go into closed session for this next item. So can I just await for confirmation?